All right, let's jump right in today. We're tackling bail applications in India under the NDPS Act. And for this deep dive, we're leaning on the work of legal expert Shivam Shukla.
Definitely some heavy stuff.
Yeah, it might not sound super exciting, but I think once we peel back the layers here,
Oh, yeah.
it gets pretty fascinating.
It's high stakes, for sure.
Absolutely.
We're dealing with serious offenses here. And a system designed to control drug trafficking, but it also has to balance individual rights. So that's where things get kind of interesting.
Yeah, and it sounds like, from what I'm seeing in Shivam Shukla's analysis, that getting bail under the NDPS Act, it's not a walk in the park, right?
Right.
What makes it so tricky?
It's like this, the act sets a really, really high bar for getting bail, especially when we're talking about commercial quantities of drugs.
Uh-huh.
And then you've got Section 37, which lays out these two conditions that have to be met.
Okay.
And they're not easy.
So it's not as simple as just showing up and being like, hey, I didn't do it. What are those two conditions?
Okay, so first, you have to convince the court that it's actually likely that you are innocent.
Okay.
It's not enough to just say you are.
Right.
You have to really present evidence that makes it seem very probable to them.
So, like, you need to prove you have a good chance of actually winning at trial.
Exactly. And then second, the court also has to believe that if they let you out on bail, you're not going to just dive right back into the drug trade. They want to be sure that releasing you won't put society at risk.
It's this constant push and pull between individual liberty and keeping the public safe. No wonder these cases get so messy.
Yeah. And that's where higher courts come in.
Okay.
Especially the high courts. They're kind of a checks and balances system.
So if a lower court denies bail, the high court can step in and take a second look. Is it like a full do-over, or what happens there?
It's more of a super in-depth review. They don't just, glance it over. They really scrutinize everything. They look at the original accusations, the evidence, the lower court's reasoning for denying bail. It's kind of like getting a second opinion from a specialist.
I imagine they're also looking really closely at how the whole investigation was handled.
Yeah.
Making sure all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed.
Oh, for sure. Procedural compliance, that's a big one in NDPS cases. The high court, they want to see if those investigating agencies follow the rules super carefully, particularly the rules laid out in sections 41, 42, and 50.
Hold on. Can we unpack that a little bit?
Yeah.
What do those sections actually cover?
Okay.
And why are they so important here?
Think of it like this. Those sections are like the rule book for law enforcement. Section 41, that's about how searches should be done. Section 42 lays out the process for seizing evidence. And then Section 50, that's all about protecting the rights of the accused during the whole process.
So let's say there's even a small slip-up during the investigation. Like a search was done without a proper warrant.
Yeah.
Does that potentially jeopardize the entire case?
Oh, yeah, you got it. Even a little deviation from those procedures can create some big questions about whether the evidence is any good and about the case as a whole.
This makes me think of the 1999 Supreme Court case, State of Punjab versus Baldev Singh, which Shivam Shukla touched upon. Seems like that set a pretty important precedent.
Oh, yeah. It's a landmark case. The Supreme Court, they basically made it clear that ignoring those procedural safeguards, and especially those in Section 50, it's not just a minor technicality.
Yeah.
It's a straight-up violation of the person's rights. It's like they drew a line in the sand and said, these rules, they aren't just suggestions. They're the foundation of a fair legal process.
So it's not just about the evidence itself,
right,
but the way it was gathered.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's shift gears a bit. Say you're a lawyer putting together a bail application for the high court.
Yeah.
What are the must-haves? The documents you absolutely cannot file without.
Well, first off, you absolutely got to have a copy of that first information report.
The FIR.
Yeah, it's the bedrock of the case. Lays out those initial accusations. Can't really do much without that.
Makes sense. Got to know what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
What else is super important?
Oh, you definitely need that lower court's order where they denied bail.
Okay.
That's key. It's like a map showing you exactly why they said no and maybe where you've got some wiggle room to make your case.
So you're basically looking for weaknesses in that first decision.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. You want to see if they maybe misinterpreted the law or missed some important facts. And then you've got the case diary.
Oh, what's that?
That's basically like a play-by-play of the whole investigation. It can be a gold mine. You can sometimes find inconsistencies or places where they didn't quite follow procedure. It's where you really put on your detective hat.
I mean, that gets pretty interesting.
Oh, it can be. It's like solving a puzzle.
All right. So besides those, what else can make or break a bail application?
Oh, the details of the accused person's time in custody. Those are critical. You need to highlight how long they've been locked up without even having a trial.
Right.
Especially if it seems like it's been going on way too long.
Yeah.
Because that raises all sorts of red flags about whether it's even fair. And then, of course, you've got the basics. ID proof to show everything's legit, and any extra evidence that supports your arguments.
What kind of supporting evidence are we talking about here?
Things like if they have a steady job or a clean record, maybe medical records. It's all about showing the bigger picture, right? That this person has ties to the community. They're not going to just disappear. So
it's not just a straight-up legal argument.
No.
You're trying to show the human side of things.
Absolutely. And this is where things get kind of interesting, you know? What Shivam Shukla is pointing out is that the whole world of NDPS bail, it's actually shifting. Courts are looking at these cases differently now, and we're starting to see some really fascinating trends popping up.
Wait, really? Tell me more about that. Are we seeing any movement towards a more balanced approach?
It seems like there's definitely a growing concern about keeping people in jail for too long before they even have their trial. Courts are starting to realize that just ain't right.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. Just because someone is accused of something serious doesn't mean they should be locked up for who knows how long without even getting the chance to defend themselves.
Exactly. And there's this recent case, Tufan Singh versus State of Tamil Nadu, where the court actually granted bail just because the trial had been delayed so long. It was like they were saying, hold on, you can't just keep someone behind bars forever without giving them their day in court.
Wow, that's a pretty strong message. It sounds like the pendulum might be swinging a little bit towards the accused, at least when it comes to making sure they get a fair and timely trial.
Yeah, it's a definite shift. And it's not just about how long they've been in custody. Courts are also taking a closer look at how much drugs were actually involved in the case.
So is it a simple equation like more drugs equals less chance of bail? Or is there more to it than that?
It's definitely not that straightforward anymore. Shivam Shukla points out that courts are getting better at seeing the difference between, like, personal use and when someone's dealing drugs on a big scale.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty important distinction to make. Someone with a tiny amount for personal use shouldn't automatically be treated the same as a drug lord.
Exactly. And we're seeing that reflected in the bail decisions. Courts are becoming more willing to grant bail if it's a smaller amount, especially if there's no evidence that they were planning to sell it.
This is all pretty encouraging. It sounds like things are moving in a more humane direction, which is great. But I'm curious, if the law itself is so strict, how do these procedural errors even happen? Are the investigators intentionally messing up?
I don't think it's always intentional. NDPS cases can be super complicated, so sometimes mistakes just happen. But you're right, a good lawyer can really use those slip-ups to their advantage.
So it becomes a key part of their strategy.
Oh, absolutely. Shivam Shukla really emphasizes that. Lawyers are now like hawks, you know? They're scrutinizing every single step of the investigation, looking for anything they can use to help their client get bail.
So what would you say are the most important things for a lawyer to focus on when they're putting together one of these bail applications, considering all these new trends?
Well, if you're looking at Shivam Shukla's work, there are a few big things to keep in mind. The first one, procedural irregularities. Those are huge.
Right, those violations of the sections we talked about, 41, 42, 50.
Yeah, those can really make a difference.
So if you can show that the evidence was maybe collected the wrong way,
right,
or that the accused person's rights were violated, that's a big win.
Absolutely. It calls the whole case into question. And then another thing is building a strong argument for proportionality.
Okay.
You really want to focus on how long they've been held before trial, especially if it seems excessive.
So remind the court that everyone's entitled to a speedy trial, and that being held for too long without one is a violation of their rights.
Exactly. That's where Article 21 of the Indian Constitution comes in, the right to life and personal liberty. You're essentially arguing that keeping them locked up for that long is a form of injustice in itself.
Got it. So we've got procedural violations and proportionality. What else can lawyers use?
Well, if it applies, you definitely want to emphasize how little the person was actually involved. If they were just a small player, you know, don't let them get lumped in with the big guys.
So if they were more of a bit player, or maybe didn't even realize what was going on, make sure the court understands that.
Exactly. The punishment should fit the crime, or in this case, their level of involvement. And then Shivam Shukla also talks about giving the court some reassurance that granting bail is okay. So you might offer what are called alternative remedies.
So it's about showing good faith, showing the court they're taking it seriously and will cooperate.
Yeah, exactly. A lawyer might make some promises on behalf of their client, like they'll fully cooperate with the investigation. They'll stick to any conditions the court sets, or they'll even surrender their passport so they can't run away. It's all about showing the court that releasing them isn't going to cause a bunch of problems.
This has been really eye-opening. I have to admit, when we started this deep dive, I thought these NDPS cases were pretty cut and dry. Drugs, no bail. But it's so much more complicated than that.
It's a complex area of law, but I think what we're seeing from Shivam Shukla's work is that things are changing. Courts are becoming more aware of the importance of following procedure, protecting individual rights, and finding that balance between fighting crime and making sure justice is served.
Definitely a lot for our listeners to think about. Where do we go from here? What's the big takeaway you want them to leave with?
What's really interesting is that, as courts try to figure out this whole balancing act between controlling drugs and upholding people's rights, the whole system of bail under the NDPS Act is evolving, and that makes you wonder, how is this going to affect India's overall strategy for fighting drug offenses? That's something to really ponder, isn't it?
That's a great point. Some people might argue that strict bail conditions are necessary to keep drug trafficking in check and keep everyone safe. But then others might say that overly harsh laws and holding people for too long without a trial can damage people's faith in the legal system. It's a tough balancing act.
Absolutely. And it's one that really needs to be talked about more. And I think Shivam Shukla's work has added a lot to that conversation.
I agree. Well, this has been a fantastic deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from the nitty-gritty of the NDPS Act to these bigger questions about justice and fairness. Hopefully, our listeners now have a much better grasp on just how complex this whole system is.
Yeah, it's definitely not simple. But by understanding the details of these bail applications, maybe we can work towards a system that effectively combats drug offenses, but does so in a way that's fair to everyone involved.
Well said. And if anyone's interested in learning more, I definitely recommend taking a look at Shivam Shukla's work. He offers some incredibly valuable insights. And of course, if you find yourself in a situation where you need legal guidance on this issue, please don't hesitate to reach out to a qualified professional.
Knowing your rights and understanding the ins and outs of this area of law can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you soon.